question. I want to ask about evolutionary theory. Is it true that we humans evolved from apes? Well, the honest answer is yes and no, because it depends on how you define us humans. Do you only look at our physical bodies? Or do you recognize that we are actually conscious beings, we are minds that are more than the physical bodies? Our minds are just using our physical bodies to express ourselves in this physical universe. So if you think we are only our bodies, then the answer is yes. If you think we are more than our bodies, the answer is no. So let's take a little closer look at this. What the Ascended Masters have actually said is that the traditional view that you find in some religions, especially ones based on the Old Testament, is this view of instant creation by God. So, not really instant, but 6 days. God created the world in 6 days. And then he rested. Now, if God is almighty, why would he need to rest? Ask yourself that question. But anyway, so the Ascended Masters are saying this isn't actually correct. The 6 days are a symbol for different stages. And so the way to explain this is that the Ascended Masters are the ones who are creating our material universe. And they are doing this as a process. It's not an instant creation where they just snap their fingers and here's a planet with all the species that we see today. It comes in stages. And they haven't really described them in detail, but if you look at just Earth, you can see that science, both geology and biology and physics, they have discovered many of these stages that have happened on Earth. So you can say that there was a time where there was no planet, and then there was a planet, but there was no life on it. So what the Ascended Masters are explaining is that there are certain overall processes that guide the unfoldment of the material world. These processes are of course based on what science calls natural laws. But these laws were defined by the Ascended Masters. So you can see that what science has discovered is that there are these constants between various physical forces, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, gravity, this and that. There are all of these many constants. You can look that up very easily. And if they were just a little bit different, the universe that we know it couldn't exist. So in other words, the Ascended Masters defined these constants because they had a certain vision for how they would manifest this universe. And these laws, these constants, they are defining the parameters for how the universe evolves. So the Ascended Masters are in no way denying that there is an evolutionary process. But of course, the unique thing about the Ascended Masters is that they are saying the evolutionary process is not unconscious. It is not random chance that guides it. But here's what they say. Let's take Earth, right? So there were certain, let's call them natural laws, because that's what science calls them. So there were certain natural laws that guided the formation of our solar system and the formation of the Earth. And the Ascended Masters started this process, but they're not micromanaging it. It's not that they're looking at every little thing that happens. You can, in a way, you can say that the Masters set things in motion. They defined the laws, they defined the constants, then they set things in motion, and they sort of let them develop on their own. And then when the evolutionary process had brought Earth to a certain stage, the Masters then stepped in, and now they used other laws and constants, but by their direct intervention, they created the first life on Earth. So it wasn't that life just came into being by random chance. This is what scientists who are materialists, they want to portray it that way. But the fact is that after all of this, now almost 150 years since Darwin, or more than 150 years since Darwin, science materialists hasn't come up with a credible theory of how this happened, how life actually suddenly came into being from inorganic materials. And this was because life came into being because the Ascended Master stepped in, provided that impetus that created the first life forms. And then, again, there were constants, there were laws that guided the evolutionary process of the first life forms. But there was for a time where it just was allowed to happen. But then at a certain stage, the Ascended Masters stepped in again, and now they created higher life forms, eventually leading to mammals, eventually leading to primates. And so, again, the evolutionary process brought forth physical life forms that were pretty close to human bodies, that had these abilities to walk, to climb, to have hands, and brains of a certain size. What you will notice if you look at evolutionary theory, they talk about the missing link, because there's in the fossil record, there's no direct link between apes and humans. And this is because materialists have gotten themselves into a logical bind, because they are saying that life evolved randomly and evolved with all of these very gradual processes, because they are saying it's random genetic mutations that guide the evolution of life. And therefore, there can't be any big leaps, because you can't have one genetic mutation that suddenly takes place in the body of an ape and suddenly creates the body of a human, because the body of a human is so much more complicated that it would require multiple genetic mutations to go from there to there. But they are saying that there can't be anything that suddenly creates this leap from monkeys to humans. And therefore, theoretically, there should be these very small steps, these life forms that was a very gradual evolution from monkeys to humans. But they haven't found that in the fossil record, and that's why they're confused. And what I'm saying is the Ascended Masters is saying the missing link there was that there wasn't just one or a number of random genetic mutations. There was a direct interference where the Masters gave an impetus, an impulse, so that life stepped up to a higher level. And that was what created the bodies that human beings could descend to. So, you see what I'm saying? There is an evolutionary process that has gradually brought forth life forms on Earth that has led to the evolution of physical bodies that we call human bodies. But this was guided by the Ascended Masters, and it was guided by a clear vision to bring forth physical bodies that first of all had physical abilities, but also had the brain capacity to serve as an instrument for self-aware beings. We are self-aware beings. We exist independently of our physical bodies. Your mind, what many religions call the soul, exists independently. This is proven by, if you are open to that proof, it's proven by near-death experiences. Millions of people have had near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, whatever. People have remembered past lives and so forth and so on. So if you're open to this, there's plenty of evidence that our beings exist independently of the body. And this is because instead of the universe being guided by chance, the universe is guided by a clear vision to provide a physical environment where self-aware beings with a higher level of consciousness can express ourselves, can have experiences, can experiment with our co-creative abilities. This is the whole purpose. I explained this in my video about how the world was created. So there is an evolutionary process, but it's not random, it's not unconscious, it's guided by a purpose, and the purpose is us. to give us a platform to express ourselves. And we, on planet Earth, there are other planets where there are different life forms, of course, but on planet Earth, the only life form that really gives the basis for self-aware beings is human bodies. So, you know, from that perspective, no, we didn't evolve from apes, but and you can, in a sense, you can say that our bodies didn't even evolve from apes, but our bodies are a result of a gradual process. And apes were part of that process because, in a sense, you could say, and this is another thing that most religious people will object to, because they will say that God created the animals and God is perfect, so therefore God must have created them perfect from the beginning. But the reality is that the evolutionary process is actually a process of experimentation. It's a process of feedback. What Darwin saw as the survival of the fittest was actually a feedback mechanism. And it's a feedback mechanism because the physical life is created by beings in a higher realm, conscious beings in a higher realm. And those beings aren't perfect. They are also evolving. And by creating this evolutionary process and gradually bringing forth life forms and seeing what survives and what doesn't survive, they are evolving as well. So you could say that everything is evolving. And we live in a way in an experimental world that has the purpose of raising the consciousness of the self-aware beings who are part of this world. And I know this will be, of course, completely against what both the materialists and the traditional religious people are saying. And to me, that's the most wonderful characteristic of Ascended Master teachings, that they don't conform to any of the traditional beliefs, but are willing to go beyond them. And so it's just a question of, you know, how much are you willing to stretch your mind to get the intuitive insights of seeing how much more this model actually explains than the traditional model. Because to me, all of my life, I've always been looking for a higher understanding. I've not been looking for the ultimate truth. I've been looking for a higher understanding. In other words, for me, the value of an idea is, can it explain something that other ideas, the most common ideas, don't explain? And by working with this idea of the Ascended Masters, of a guided evolution, it has such great explanatory power compared to the traditional models. And interestingly, there are now people with a very credible scientific background who are beginning to think along the same lines. I have before in my videos mentioned Bernardo Kastrup and Donald Hoffman, who have started developing theories of consciousness. But there's another man called Federico Fascin, an Italian, who has actually written a book called Irreducible, where he talks in very great depth and detail about the connection between physical matter, or the physical universe, and consciousness. So you don't need to take my word for it or the Ascended Master teachings, because there are people who are really thinking about this and who are coming from a scientific background, but who are just seeing that the materialistic paradigm obviously has some limitations that it can't explain. There are some questions that can't be explained. Like Donald Hoffman has said, for example, that after 40 years of very intense brain research, we can't explain how you experience the color red. And not only can't we explain it, we don't even have a credible experience of how this happens. In other words, how a physical sensation gives rise to an experience in consciousness. We don't have a credible theory based on the brain, and that's why he says we have to look for other explanations, which he explains, and you can find videos with him. You can, for that matter, find videos with all three of them. And you can see that many people who don't know anything about Ascended Masters are beginning to question materialism and are beginning to realize, as Federico Fascin very really profoundly explains, that consciousness is the underlying reality, not matter.